All right. So this is one of the typical OpenChain webinars, the 53rd in our series, where after filling out a lot of material on a lot of topics, one of the key things that has come up again and again in open source compliance management is how do we automate things? And a sub-question under that has been, how do we use, if we want, open source tools to do open source automation? Now, we've covered some ground on this. We've looked at tools developed in places like Germany or the United States. Recently, we've looked at a tool from Korea called Fosslite. Today, we're going to take a look at something from China. This is an OpenSCA solution with an open source variant available on GitHub and the backing of a company behind it called XMirror. Now, not to jump ahead too little, but it's interesting from our perspective as the OpenChain community to have something like an open source command line tool that is available. We can call it from existing frameworks like ORT, that's the Open Source Review Toolkit, or Fossology or Fosslite. In other words, it sounds like there's some interesting integration possibilities here. And quite frankly, while we have a lot of insight into what's been happening in places like North America and Europe, we don't have a lot of insight into what the open source community in China is doing around tooling, around community building, and especially around open source tools for open source compliance. Anyway, we're about to fix that today, but before we do, I'm going to put up our antitrust policy notice as usual. Our full antitrust policy is available on the Linux Foundation website. And if you're from a member company, you can reach out to our counsel, Andy Updegrove, with any questions. But in short, it's designed to help us talk about things in a comfortable manner that allows free conversation between parties. Okay, back to our webinar and OpenSCA. We're going to welcome to our series today, Yue from XMirror. And as with all of our webinars, this is an informal webinar event. Feel free to ask questions and feel free to share your knowledge and experience as well. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to you, Yue. Are you ready?
Okay, I'm ready. Can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Okay. Just wait for a second. Let me just show my screen there.
Looks great. Ooh, Zelda.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, wait for a second. And how can I open
the slides are showing perfectly on our side. They're looking good.
I'm trying to open my, yeah. Okay, now, hello. All right, I'll start now. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Shane. Hello, everyone. I'm Julia from OpenSCA community, and it's very happy today to have the chance to share our idea and practice with you. Any questions are welcome after I finish my presentation. And my topic today, as it's shown on the slide, is OpenSCA manage open source risks by an open source solution. In general, we initiate OpenSCA to provide an open source solution to the open source risks. As for the reason, the specific method, and our achievements, I'm going to elaborate on the details in later parts. We have 4 parts in total today. The first is about the necessity of the open source solution. And secondly, we go further into details of OpenSCA itself. Then I'm going to talk about our community before finally ending up with an initiative to build the open source solution together. The first part starts with a question. Why do we need an open source solution? It is known to all that there are multiple mature commercial solutions in the market, so why bother? Let's start from some kind of background part. In recent years, the world has been witnessing the surging importance of open source codes and software. Subsequently, the security concerns also gradually come to the fore. The most common solution is the SCA technology. Fundamentally, we use it to get the list of open source components and vulnerabilities introduced. Then we manage and mitigate known risks based on the list. Moreover, with the list, we can make the response as soon as possible when new open source vulnerabilities break out. And most importantly, SCA is actually the cornerstone in managing software supply chain security. However, traditional commercial solutions are relatively disadvantaged due to the high cost and exclusiveness. The cost of procurement, deployment, and maintenance makes it hard for smaller or emerging companies and projects to implement open source management. But they're an indispensable part of not only open source users, but also the whole supply chain. And meanwhile, the commercial product is set to some extent. The limited scenario hinders the fulfillment of a general and shared solution across the whole chain. Therefore, given the limited proportion of larger companies and the increasing demands for supply chain security, the commercial solution is definitely not a panacea. And the open source solution fits perfectly in these aspects. Apart from being obviously low cost and open for redevelopment, it's also applicable in a wider range and won't be limited to a certain vendor's perspective. In other words, turning to open source is a reasonable choice when trying to find a compatible and high potential answer to the question of managing open source security. It's transparent, accessible to redevelopment, open to the upstream and downstream, as well as more possibilities and creativeness. Now let's go further into OpenSCA itself, about what is it and how can it help. OpenSCA is an open source project that could steadily and flexibly offer SCA ability and aware users of all open source component sets and risks introduced. Our community aims to constructing a low-cost, compatible, and extensible solution to open source security in joint efforts. The picture on the right is from our GitHub repository. We support 8 languages, including Java, JavaScript, PHP, Python, and so on. When it comes to workflow, OpenSCA works in the user's local host, outputting dependencies and vulnerabilities introduced by analyzing feature files of the code. It's easy to use even for rookies, applicable for both online and offline scenarios with complete and independent ability provided, and also allows diverse integrations into the original workflow. And here I attached part of our README file. Users can choose whether to get vulnerability information, whether to use our online vulnerability database, whether to connect to local Maven component database, and so on. It is quite open. And in short, just start with one command and use a local or online vulnerability database. Then the result files will with both components and vulnerabilities in multiple formats will be generated in the user's local directory. This slide shows different formats of results, including an overview in CMD at below, a detailed one in JSON, and another detailed one in HTML for better visualization. And in the report, details like the name, version, language, license, and dependency path of components, as well as the name, ID, description, suggestion, attack type, release date, security level, and exploit level of vulnerabilities are all displayed. All files can be freely sent to or share with your team members. And SPOOM is also another important tool that can be used to manage the component assets, vulnerabilities, and license compliance in all codes. And standard SPOOM is especially useful for various roles from vendors across the supply chain to share and check. So in addition to detection results of component and vulnerability assets, our OpenSCA also supports outputting standard SPOOM files in the format of SPDX, SynclonDX, and SWID. These two pictures are SPDX on the left and SynclonDX on the right. Now we have the list as the essential part of managing open source risks. The shared standard SPOOM for all sides on the chain. What if new vulnerabilities break out? Considering this, we've built up our open source vulnerability intelligence system and are now providing service for our community members, noticing them to the latest vulnerability information and trying to facilitate a proper and timely action. The next part following is about our community. After the open source project is released, we have been gradually building up a community based on OpenSCA. And thanks to this stable and useful little tool, thousands of developers, security staff, open source project users and maintainers shared our idea of constructing an open source solution, and they also empowered us with their practice, observation, and thoughts in this field. And we also got some recognition worldwide with so many prizes. And this is one of our typical use cases. Our user redeveloped OpenSCA and integrated into the company's original development flow, setting up security access control and corresponding management procedure. This user is one of the users suggesting we support the local Maven repository. Actually, we gradually find that users' advices are always very practical and means quite a lot to all the members of this open source project. We're almost end of my presentation, but last but not least, the vitality and version of an open source project actually comes from joint efforts of the whole community. So we're now planning to provide our solution to the international users' open source risk management. And we're also ambitious to explore more scenarios and further possibilities of SCA technology together with our user community and also the software supply chain security. Hope everyone interested in this direction can join us and let's build something full of possibility together. Okay, that's all for my presentation, and thank you for listening. And please feel free to come up with any ideas and problems.
This is great. Thank you so much. We are getting some questions in already. Philippe, who is very well known in the global open source tooling area. He's with a company called Nextbee. He's behind tools like ScanCode and so on, and one of the very early people helping with stuff like SPDX, has a question. He wants to know, is the vulnerability database and a web user interface open source as well?
All right. So the problem is about our online vulnerability database, right?
The question is the vulnerability database available as open source? And question number two, is the graphical user interface available as open source? So asking if the vulnerability database and a user interface are available as open source, or just the command line tool.
Okay. We have a command line tool and also a IDEA plugin open source on GitHub, which is available on GitHub. And also as for the vulnerability database, we are now offering an online service to it and also have a demo for our users to sort out their own vulnerability database. Actually, we are planning to kind of provide some convenient vulnerability database for the users to check in their local host environment instead of our already their online ones. So this is my answer to the availability of vulnerability database. And also, as for the other one relevant to the user interface, as I said, we have a CLI command line tool, which is a engine actually, and also an IDEA plugin for users to use in their development environment. Yeah.
But no graphical user interface at this juncture, so it's more of CLI and plugin. Okay, understood. Great. We have another question in from Marcel. He's asking about the future governance of the project. He's asking, is it planned in the future to shift this open source tool project into an independent foundation like Apache Foundation, Linux Foundation, or Eclipse Foundation? Or is it planned to keep it as a company project?
From my perspective, we have no plan to donate it to other foundation right now. In a certain period of time, we will just keep it as a company tool. Yeah.
Understood. And we have another question in from Florent. He's asking, how does this tool relate or compare to other tools like ScanOSS, ScanCode, ORT? And then he also mentions other things like Renovate, Dependency Bot, SNCC, JFrog X-Ray. So basically, you know, how does this tool relate to other SCA tools in the market? I'm going to have to try to contextualize that because I don't have full contextualization from Florent himself. He can add it, of course. But you know, is this tool designed to fill gaps? Is this tool its own tool, standalone, not developed so much in consideration of the other tools?
All right. I guess actually we're talking about the some kind of features of our tool. So I'll go back to that slide just wait for a second. Yeah, this is the slide I made for actually this question, and I'd like to make a very brief answer right now. And if you have any further questions or doubts, you can just feel free to continue on this, and we can just have a discussion. Basically, our tool is it's a quite easy one. It's small, but it's really flexible to use as a command line tool. And also it has a complete ability which could work independently in your local host, which I think is quite meaningful and not so usual to say in other open source SCA tools. So, yeah, and also our engine is open source too. So it's not like that we're purposely just open source part of it. We're actually trying to build up a more complete and independent open source tool for our users. Yeah.
A great answer. Thank you very much. And I'm sure one thing to point out is that, this is, I think, the first time we've had this tool described outside of the Chinese language. So we're probably at early days in working out the details of interlink here. So one thing that'll be cool, and this is relevant, I think, to Marcel's question about where the tool could be placed, or Philip's question about features, and Florence' question too. One thing will be cool is to add this to our understanding of the landscape and see how the tools interrelate or complement each other. Now, there's a question which touches on that from Nico over at Orange, which is basically asking about how licenses are identified. And this is the interrelated question. Did you write your own scanner for all of the supported technologies, or do you rely on existing tools to help scan supported technologies?
About the license part, we actually have our own logic to parse in the license of all the components. And we also have a knowledge base collecting those licenses that we and our colleague collected throughout the years, because actually we are a vendor offers security solution to in the development security realm. So we kind of have this kind of acceleration, accumulation in years. So our license database is actually, we made it on our own. And as for the analysis of licenses, that part is also, we write it in our engine. So yeah, that's it.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Now, I want to encourage our audience, if you have any questions to ask. We've got time for one or two more questions, I think, on this webinar. And this is your opportunity to kick the tires on something new. You can also ask your question verbally, not just written. We have a question in from Nico, a follow-up question. He's asking, is the license database available as open source? So it's very similar to Philip asking, is the vulnerability database open source? Nico wants to check if the license database is open source.
Actually, not only they are actually similar in our logic. So the license database, both the license database and the vulnerability database, we're thinking of just offering it as a service to our users, not only in the online way, but also provide an offline version or something. And both database are also open to the users if they want to develop their own database on their own. So there are like 3 options here offered. The first one, to use our online service, including vulnerability and license information. And the second one, just to download the offline one that we provided. And the third one is to organize their or collect or build up their own knowledge database. So the option number 1 and option number 3 is now available, and option number 2 is what we are gonna do in the near future. Yep.
Understood. Now, just to clarify on that, so that means option number 1, cloud database, option number 2, locally hosted database from the company, those are service offerings, those are commercial offerings. And then option number 3, people can roll their own database, build their own database if they want to. Is that a correct understanding?
Not exactly. The cloud database and the offline localhost database are not commercial, or so they're just it's just we provide for our users. It's not open source, but it's not commercial either.
Got it. It's like a freeware.
Yeah.
Dira has a question as well.
Yep.
Okay, so Dira's question, actually it relates, I think, to what we just talked about. Does the scanner contact XMirror servers, and how is the data accumulated? So I'm guessing the answer here is basically if you're using the XMirror databases, the tool is contacting the servers, but there's an option to run it inside your own space as well. Would that be correct?
Not exactly. I'm gonna go into details and try to clarify this part. As we can see in my screen, right there, the left part, it's the workflow of our OpenSCA that I drew yesterday. Basically, the engine works just in your local host, so there is no server on cloud or on other part. It's just a engine, and the engine analyzes your feature file instead of your source code or something. The only thing it needs is just the feature file, and then from the feature file it gets the dependencies, and then it will turn to the database for vulnerability and the license information. So if you just stop here, you'll get the results only composed of component assets without any other information. And if you go further with to attach a vulnerability database into this flow, and then you'll be able to get the vulnerability introduced information in your result. So basically, there's no interaction from your local host to our like cloud engine or something. We don't actually have a cloud engine. The engine just works in your local host environment, and all the thing that is done in the cloud is that the vulnerability database is on the cloud. So every time when the engine got the dependencies, got the components information, it just go to the database to check if there are any vulnerabilities introduced in this component. And the cloud service just returns the result to the localhost engine, and the engine then just create the report. So mostly I'd say everything on the cloud is just a database instead of any server or something. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And there was a small follow-up question from Dira, just double checking that as well as vulnerability management, the tool also checks license and copyright. Is that a correct understanding from DIRA, or is it only on software vulnerabilities?
It also includes the license information there.
Thank you very much indeed. All right, we've gone through a lot of questions this time around. Our community's interest was caught by this tool. We of course have long had insight into tools in different geographies in the world, but as I said in the opening, this is our first time to get insight into a China-sourced SCA solution that is also an open source tool. Does anyone have a last question for our friend from XMirror before we wrap up? Okay, if there's no last question, I just want to say, and first of all, thank you very much for the presentation and thank you for your detailed answers to the questions. I'm sure there will be more questions as people come and have a look at this recording, and I'm sure quite a few people will want to try and download and run and test this as well. The final thing I'll say is that OpenChain has a tooling workgroup, and you're very welcome at any time to join in there in the calls. We're going to be doing an updated version of the global tooling landscape for open source tools for open source compliance. So maybe let's try and include OpenSCA into that update so people can find out about it in more places. With
I'd love to, yeah, thank you. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just about to say thank you to you, Kiyoe. Thank you for your presentation and thank you for your time.
And thank you, Shane, and thank you everyone online. This is actually my first time um, doing presentation with these slides in English, so there might be lots of imperfections or disadvantages or problems. So just thanks for everyone, and thank you for your listening. And if you're interested in our open source tool or our community, just go check our website, and just please feel free to reach out. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Perfect. And congratulations as well from Philip, who said you did great. All right.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very encouraging.
With that, we are wrapping up. Everyone have a beautiful day. Stay healthy, stay safe, and stay enthusiastic about this big and complex world out there.